Let me ask you something uncomfortable. How many decisions did you make this week, truly for yourself, not for your parents? Not to impress someone you barely know, not to avoid the dread of someone's raised eyebrow. How many, if you're honest with yourself, the number is probably smaller than you'd like to admit. And here's the wild part. Most of us have been doing this our entire lives. Living just slightly off-center. Performing a version of ourselves that's a little quieter, a little more palatable, a little more agreeable than who we actually are. And the cost, we feel chronically tired, not physically tired, something deeper. The exhaustion of maintaining a self that was designed for an audience. The greatest revolution in our generation is the discovery that human beings, by changing the inner attitudes of their minds, can change the outer aspects of their lives. William James. Today, we're going to talk about what it actually takes to stop living for approval, and why that journey begins with something that sounds almost offensive. The courage to be disliked. To understand why so many of us are addicted to external approval, we need to go back to the beginning. Not your beginning, evolutionary history. Human beings are social animals. For most of our existence, being rejected from the group meant death, literally. No tribe, no food, no approval, no survival. So our brains evolved to crave belonging the way they crave oxygen. That mechanism was useful once, but we're no longer living in the savannah. You're not going to die because your coworker didn't like your idea in the meeting. You're not going to be exiled because you posted an opinion online that got mixed reviews. And yet your nervous system treats those situations with the same urgency as physical danger. The brain's threat detection system cannot distinguish between social rejection and physical harm. Both activate the same neural pathways. This is why approval seeking is so sticky. It isn't a character flaw. It isn't weakness. It's a deeply wired survival strategy that has been misfiring in the modern world for decades. Now add to that the architecture of social media. Platforms literally built around a metric, the like, that quantifies social approval in real time. Every post becomes a small performance. Every silence after you share something becomes a small rejection. And over time, you stop expressing yourself and start optimizing yourself. You post what gets the response, not what's true. Here's what makes this so insidious. You don't notice it happening. It's gradual. You soften one opinion. You don't share one genuine feeling. You dress slightly differently for a certain crowd. Each compromise feels small, reasonable even. But over years, you look in the mirror and realize you don't fully recognize who you've become. Psychologists call this self-monitoring, the degree to which we adjust our self-presentation based on social context. High self-monitors are often socially successful, but they report significantly lower levels of authentic connection and personal satisfaction. So the question is, how do we get out? In 2013, a Japanese book called Kuroweru Yuuki, which translates to the courage to be disliked, became a cultural phenomenon. It reached millions of readers worldwide and sparked a quiet revolution in how people think about freedom, responsibility, and happiness. The book is a dialogue between a philosopher and a young man, and it's built on the psychology of Alfred Adler, a contemporary of Freud and Jung who has, for a long time, been unfairly overlooked. Adler's ideas are genuinely radical, and I want to walk you through the ones that I think can change your life. Your past does not determine your present. Freudian psychology, which dominates popular understanding, says we are largely shaped by our past, our traumas, our childhood, our formative experiences. And there's truth in that, but Adler pushes back hard. He says we don't suffer from the wounds of the past. We choose the meaning we give to the past in order to justify our present behavior. Adler's insight: we use the narrative of our past as a tool, sometimes to explain our limitations, sometimes to excuse inaction. The past doesn't trap us, our interpretation of it does. That sounds harsh. And it is uncomfortable, but it's also deeply liberating. Because if you are not determined by your past, then you are not a product of what happened to you. You are the product of the choices you make right now. All problems are interpersonal problems. Think about the things that cause you the most pain. The anxiety about what people think, the resentment towards someone who wronged you, the shame of failure, the loneliness of feeling unseen. Adler argues that every single one of these, at its core, involves your relationship to other people, either real people or imagined audiences. Even depression, Adler would say, often has an interpersonal dimension, a withdrawal from connection, or a deep fear of judgment. This doesn't minimize your suffering. It reframes where the solution lies. Not in isolating yourself further, but in changing how you navigate relationships. Freedom is the courage to be disliked, and here's the one that hits hardest. Adler says that the desire to be liked by everyone is, itself, a form of imprisonment. When you need everyone's approval, you become a hostage to everyone's opinion. You can't be honest, you can't make bold choices, you can't say no, you can't grow. Because growth, by definition, involves becoming someone new, and not everyone will like who you're becoming. True freedom, in Adler's framework, is not freedom from other people. It is freedom from the need to control what other people think of you. That's a profound distinction, and it requires, and this is key, courage. Not indifference, not arrogance, courage. The willingness to be disliked, even when it's uncomfortable because you've chosen something more important. Authenticity. One of the most practically useful tools Adler offers is something called the separation of tasks. And once you understand this concept, you will never be able to unsee it. Here's the core idea. Every situation in life involves tasks, things that belong to you and things that belong to someone else. Your job, the only job that is truly yours, is to live in alignment with your own values and make your choices accordingly. What other people then think about those choices, that is their task, not yours. Let me give you a concrete example. Suppose you decide to quit a stable but soul-crushing job to pursue something you actually care about. You make that decision clearly and honestly. You've done your task. Now your parents are disappointed. Your friends are skeptical. A colleague thinks you're naive. Their reactions, their judgments, their disappointment, those are their tasks. You don't own them. You are not responsible for managing them. Separation of tasks asks, is this my responsibility to carry? Most of our anxiety comes from carrying tasks that were never ours to begin with. Now, this doesn't mean you stop caring about people. You can love someone deeply and still not contort yourself to manage their emotional reactions to your choices. In fact, Adler would argue that the most respectful thing you can do for another person is treat them as capable of handling their own emotional experience, without your constant self-sacrifice to soften it. This is where people often misread the message. They hear "don't care what others think," and they interpret it as be selfish or ignore people's feelings. That's not it. The goal is not to create isolation. It's to stop living in anticipatory performance mode, where every decision is pre-filtered through imagined judgment. There's a useful question I want you to start carrying with you. Am I making this choice, or am I avoiding a reaction? Choosing silence in a meeting, is that wisdom or fear? Staying in a relationship, is that love or avoidance of conflict? Not pursuing a dream, is that practicality or a preemptive surrender to imagined judgment? You don't always have to act on what you discover. But knowing, actually knowing, which one is driving you is the beginning of real freedom. When we stop trying to manage everyone else's emotional responses to our existence, we get back enormous amounts of mental and emotional energy that can go toward actually living. Let's get into something that doesn't get talked about enough when people discuss authenticity. Most of us have spent so long performing that we've genuinely lost track of who we are underneath it. Authenticity sounds great in theory, but if you strip away the performing, what's left? For many people, this is terrifying because the answer is, I don't know. And that uncertainty is real, and it's valid, and it's a starting point, not a failure. Here's what I've come to understand. Authentic selfhood is not something you discover, like finding a lost object. It's something you practice like a skill. Every time you make a choice that is genuinely yours, not a performance, not a people-pleasing reflex, but something that comes from your actual values, you're doing the work of becoming yourself. Authenticity is not a destination. It is a daily practice of small, honest choices compounded over time. Start with the small stuff. Notice when you give your real opinion versus your safe opinion. Notice when you dress for yourself versus for the perceived approval of others. Notice when you say yes and mean no. These micro moments are where identity is actually built. There's a concept in psychology called self-concept clarity, the degree to which you have a clear, consistent, and stable sense of who you are. Research consistently shows that people with high self-concept clarity experience lower anxiety, stronger relationships, and greater life satisfaction. Not because they've figured everything out, but because they have a stable inner reference point. When you live entirely for external validation, you have no inner reference point. Your identity is a reflection of whoever is looking at you. And that means you are perpetually unstable, rising and falling with every compliment and criticism. It's exhausting. Building self-concept clarity is not about becoming rigid or closed off to feedback. It's about developing enough of a self that you can hear feedback without being dismantled by it. You can consider whether criticism is true and useful, without needing it to be false in order to feel okay. The person who knows who they are can receive feedback. The person who doesn't know who they are can only receive attack or praise, because all feedback is existential. So what does this look like in practice? Start asking yourself questions that most of us never actually sit with. What do you value, not what you think you should value, but what actually matters to you? What kind of life would feel meaningful if no one were watching? What have you been wanting to say to someone, to the world, that you've been holding back? You don't have to act on all of it immediately, but you do have to know it. Because you cannot live authentically from a position of self-ignorance. Here's something that surprises people about Adlerian psychology. For a philosophy that talks so much about individual freedom, it places enormous weight on community and connection. Adler believed that genuine well-being comes not from independence alone, but from what he called community feeling, a sense of belonging to something larger than yourself, and genuinely contributing to others. This is the part where authenticity and courage intersect with love. Because Adler is not saying, become an island, be indifferent to everyone. He's saying, connect, but connect as yourself, not as a performance. The deepest connection happens not when you become what someone wants, but when you allow yourself to be fully seen and choose to see others fully in return. Think about the people in your life you feel most at ease with. I'd bet it's not the ones you perform for, it's the ones around whom you can exhale. The ones who know your awkward corners and your contradictions and don't need you to resolve them. That ease is only possible because some version of authenticity was allowed in the room. When you give up the performance, you don't lose connection. You finally find the real thing. You trade wide and shallow for narrow and deep. You trade being liked by everyone for being truly known by someone. And honestly, that trade is worth it. Adler also talks about contribution, the idea that a meaningful life involves giving something to others. Not because you expect approval or gratitude, but because you are choosing to be a participant in the human community rather than an observer of it. This shifts the question from what do people think of me to what am I offering the world, and that reorientation is genuinely transformative. The shift from how am I perceived to what am I contributing is one of the most powerful psychological moves a person can make. It relocates identity from the outside world to the inside one. Let's get practical. Because this isn't just philosophy, this is something you can actually begin doing differently today. Here are 5 things, grounded in everything we've talked about, that you can start now. 1. Audit your motivations. For 1 week before any significant decision, ask yourself, am I doing this because I want to, or because I'm afraid of someone's reaction? Just noticing is enough to start. 2. Practice small, honest acts. Share a real opinion in a low-stakes conversation. Decline something you'd normally agree to out of social pressure. Dress for yourself one day. Small acts of authenticity build the muscle. 3. Let someone be disappointed. Not cruelly, just don't override your own needs to prevent their discomfort. Let them have their reaction. Practice trusting that they can handle it and that you can handle their having it. 4. Identify one thing you've been silencing. One opinion, one desire, one truth you've been holding back. You don't have to broadcast it to the world, but write it down. Acknowledge it to yourself. Give it air. 5. Shift from how do I look to what am I building? Redirect your energy from managing perception to creating something that matters to you. The preoccupation with image shrinks significantly when you're genuinely invested in something real. None of these will feel comfortable right away. That's not a sign you're doing them wrong. That's exactly the feeling Adler is pointing to when he says it takes courage. Because it does, it is genuinely uncomfortable to risk being disliked. The nervous system will protest, but discomfort is not the same as danger. And on the other side of that discomfort is something most of us have been hungry for our whole lives. The feeling of being real. Here's what I want you to take away from all of this. The life you want, the honest one, the meaningful one, the one that feels like yours, has been available to you this whole time. You have just been waiting for permission that was never going to come. Because no one is going to give you permission to be yourself. That's not how it works. The permission is the act. The courage is the permission. You will not be liked by everyone. That was never the goal, even if it felt like it was. The goal is a life that, when you are quiet and honest with yourself at the end of the day, you recognize as your own. You don't need everyone to approve of your life. You need to approve of your life. And that starts with the courage to live it, out loud, imperfectly, and exactly as you are. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, not for the numbers, but because ideas like this are worth passing on. And if you're ready to go deeper, I'll see you in the next one.